Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. One of the first themes that Epictetus talks about in the Enchiridion, which is this little handbook, is figuring out what's actually in our power and what is not in our power, and if it's not in our power, it's in somebody else's power. So it's about control. It's about figuring out what you actually have some degree of control over and what you don't. Now, why would you want to do that? Why is that important? Well, if you tie yourself in with, or if you invest yourself into things that you don't actually have any control over, you're setting yourself up to be very unhappy. And he talks about that in a lot of different examples, a lot of different ways. But first, let's figure out what actually is in our control, what actually is in our power. So he says, some things are in our control and others not. Things in our control are opinion. So later on, he'll also use the word judgments. Pursuit, desire, aversion, so whether we actually try to do something or not. Let's say choices, desires, aversions. Desires, you're all familiar with. You desire something, you want that thing, right? When you guys came in with stuff from the cafe and people could smell it, they suddenly now had a desire to eat, right? You've got it. Why do you have it? Because you had a desire to eat yourself, right? What's an aversion?
Things you avoid.
Yeah, it's like a desire, but it's in the other direction. So it's not just a desire not to have something. You could think of it like a desire against something. So you wake up in the morning and it's cold in your room and you don't want to get out of bed. It's not just that you have no desire to get out of bed. Your desire is pushing you in the other way. Stay under the covers, right? That's a bodily one. You have all sorts of desires and aversions going on all the time. What's not in our control? Oh, choices and actions. What's not in our control according to Epictetus? Yeah.
Death and disease.
Yes. Death, disease. Another bad one that he talks about is poverty. You don't have absolute control over whether you're going to be rich or poor. A lot of you start out one way and may end up the other. What else? He brings up body. Oops. Property. Reputation. And he uses this word that gets translated as command. We could think of it as position, rank, authority, all those sorts of things. In a word, whatever are not our own actions, whatever is up to other people or other things. So he says the things that are in our nature are the things that are in our control are by nature free, unrestrained, unhindered. Those that are not in our nature are weak, slavish, restrained, belonging to others. What does he mean by all these adjectives? These things you actually have some degree of control over. It may feel to you at this time that you don't. Like for instance, your opinions and your judgments, those are just facts and that's just the way that things are and I can't help but think of things this way. Well, if you look at it more carefully, and you do a little bit of self-scrutiny and maybe a little bit of trying out some new things and then some self-discipline, turns out you actually have a lot of control over how you think about things, how you view them, your attitudes towards them, your choices and your actions. Well, they're your choices, right? So you actually do have control over them. When do we usually say we don't have a choice? When we're not happy about what we did. But we actually do have, according to the Stoics, we have freedom. We have choice of our own actions. And then your desires and aversions. That's kind of a strange thing to say. Let's use that example again of bringing in let's say I brought in a pizza right now, and I'm starting to eat it in front. Why do I always use these food things? How do you think I got this size?
I always said I didn't get that by accident.
Yeah, you're right. It is before lunch. Let's pick something else besides pizza, because you notice that provoked like a desire on your part already. What would be something?
Puppy.
Puppies. Okay, so I bring in a pie. Yeah, I bring in a puppy, and puppies are cute, right? Well, they're little, provided they're not doing anything they're not supposed to do, and a lot of you would have a sort of instinctive desire to come up and pet the puppy, right? Or you start calling the puppy to come by you. It comes by you, you pick it up, you kind of cuddle it. Some of you might not like puppies, though.
We're still thinking about pie.
Yeah, you're comparing puppies and pies. And the puppy comes out worse. You might have an aversion to certain animals. Let's say you were bitten by a dog that looks just like this puppy, only the puppy's smaller. Okay, now you don't like that puppy being by you, and the very thought of it starts to turn you off. Do you have any control over that sort of stuff? Epictetus says you do, not necessarily in a direct way. It's not like once you actually have the desire, you can just turn it off. But over time, you can actually change your desires. You can change the way that you feel about things. What about this other side now? What's not in our power or control? Now, he's not saying that you don't have any stake in this, or you can't make any decisions that would affect this. Obviously, you've managed to keep yourself from dying over and over again, or you wouldn't be in this classroom. And there have been some instances in which if you did things very carelessly, perhaps some of you could have died up to this point, I'm willing to bet. Same thing with disease, right? All of you are reasonably healthy, I think. There's things that you could have chosen that you didn't choose that would result in you probably being sick. Poverty, you have some degree of control over that. Obviously, if you don't work at all, you're probably going to be poor. But here's what he's trying to get at. Let's say you say, I'm going to go after these things. But no, you're not going to go after death. You're going to go after the opposite of that, staying alive, being healthy, getting out of poverty. You say you're going to go after those things. Does that mean you're automatically going to succeed? Is it the case, in your experience, that those who take the right precautions, it always works out for them? Or they put in the work, it always turns out good?
No.
Yeah, the world is not fair, is it? And the same thing goes with a lot of these things. Think about your body. Again, a lot of you are in pretty good shape, As far as students go, on the whole, you're, pretty well dressed, fairly good-looking bunch of young adults. How much control do you have over that over time? I mean, you have control over what you wear. And I suppose, if you want to look better, you can undergo certain procedures and things like that. But you can only do so much with the body, right? You've all seen these people who've had a lot of work done, and you can tell, because after a while they cease to look human. They look like something else. Well, you can only accomplish so much. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to ask, but doesn't your desire for some of these things, don't you have control over that? So, I mean...
Sure, but he's talking about the thing itself over here.
Well, I can see death, disease,
Yeah.
body type. Those are, you're destined to die. No matter what happens.
Yeah, sooner or later.
You're destined to die.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who's never ever been sick. I can understand that.
Yeah.
Adverse poverty, we've seen it in the third world, where you people, no matter what they do, no matter how they try, they're never going to get out of that position.
Even here, there's generational poverty. Yeah.
But some of those other things, I don't know that I can buy into those, because I could change.
Buy into in what sense?
That that we don't that we're not in control of those things. I'm in
Yeah,
control
he's
of my
not saying,
reputation.
again, he's not saying that you don't have any stake in it. He's saying that despite what you do, it could still go badly. So for instance, with your body, let's say I decide I'm going to lose 50 pounds and get into shape. Okay, that's a possibility for
I
me.
decided that a long time ago.
I can, yeah, well, so have I. So I can choose that, and I can actually desire that, and I can try to make that happen. I can do that, and then I can get hit by the bus next week, or I can, my knees can go out, or all these sorts of things. Same thing with property. Obviously, if you don't work, you're much less likely to have any property unless you inherit it. But your stuff can get damaged. The insurance company can decide not to pay. There's a lot of ways in which things can go wrong. His point is not that we don't have any control whatsoever. His point is that the degree of control that we have over these things is much less than what we have over these. Same thing with reputation. I mean, think about reputation. What is it? It exists in the eyes of the others. And I think you've all had the experience of trying to make friends with somebody who just did not want to be friends with you. Or to try to, look a certain way with somebody who is just going to see the worst side of you, no matter what. You can't control that, right? You can try as best you can to use all sorts of techniques, but sometimes it just doesn't pay off. Position or rank. Is the world fair with that? I mean, you guys are going out into the workplace, but I think you've already experienced quite a bit of that it's not always the most qualified person who gets the position. It's often the most connected person, right? Or the person who just happens to be in the right place at the right time, and now they're in, and that's it. So, these things we have less control over. And why is he bringing this up? He says, think about what desire means. Desire, following desire promises the attainment of that which you're desiring. So if you want, your body to be attractive, that's one of your desires. If you want property of a certain sort, that's your desire. And if you follow that, you can choose to follow that. That's within your power. Desire starts promising to you, you're going to have this. This is going to work out. Go ahead and do this, and it's going to fall into your lap. Aversion promises what? Not having to endure what you're averse to. So if you act on your aversions, then that'll happen. But the person who fails to obtain the object of his desire, what happens to that person? Are they happy or unhappy? When you want something and you work to get it and you don't get it, how do you feel? Yeah.
Let down.
Yeah. Yeah. Now there's a whole range there, right? Let down is not that bad. Depressed, that's a lot worse. What else do you feel? Yeah.
Angry?
Yeah, anger comes out of being disappointed by things, by people, by situations. Frustration is also in that range. So mainly sadness, anger. Sometimes it can turn people very bitter, can't it? When things don't work out the way they're supposed to. I have colleagues who, unfortunately, got bitter along the way. What about aversion? If you are averse to something and you're trying to avoid it, but you fall into it, like say poverty or disease. You do your best to try to avoid disease, and you still get sick. And not just like a little sickness, you get some sort of terminal illness. Well, that sucks, right? I mean, you should feel bad if that's the case, shouldn't you? And most people would feel bad. And if you look at a person that doesn't feel bad when that sort of thing happens, you're going to want to know why, because that's so unusual. Well, it could be because they're actually a Stoic. It could be because they don't realize what's happened to them. But it could be because they're a Stoic. So he says, if you actually want to be happy, one of the things you should do is try to restrain yourself from actually having desires about these things. Just focus on this stuff over here. Desire that your desires be of the right kind. Desire that your choices and actions be the right kind. Whether or not they actually pay off with all these other good things. These aren't good things. This is the bad things. Here's the good things. He has some other suggestions along these lines. He says, if you think about some of the things that we have as possessions that people get invested in. One of the traps, if you're a Stoic, is of identifying yourself with your possessions. And people do this with, say, their clothing, right? Or their cars, or their houses. Somebody comes into your place and they say, you have a lovely house. They're actually saying something about their house, about your house. They're not saying something about you. You're not a good person because you have a lovely house. You're not a bad person because you have a lovely house either. It's just an external thing. He has an example of a horse. You know, not too many of us have horses, so that's a little hard to relate to. But it says, don't be prideful with any excellence that's not your own. If a horse was prideful and says, I'm handsome, that would make sense, right, if horses actually talked. But if you have a handsome horse and you're saying, you know, I'm really something because I've got this good-looking horse, that's something that can be taken away from you in a second. It's not something that's really your own in the real sense. You may have a deed of purchase, but that doesn't make it your own in a sort of metaphysical sense. He goes on and he says, when it comes to things of the body, provide things to the body no further than mere use. Give yourself food, give yourself drink, clothing, house, family, but don't get yourself too involved in, you know, having really nice things. Because if you do, you're going to start desiring that. That's going to become part of where you're putting your affection, your heart, your care. And if you do that, you're liable to get hurt and disappointed. And he says, you know, the condition of most people is this is actually what they're looking at. They're not really that focused on this. This is what they do, but they're not worried about having these things right. This is not where, I mean, you can take pride, he says, in having the right opinions and judgments. That would be legitimate. You could actually feel ashamed legitimately about having the wrong opinions and judgments, or making the wrong choices, or having the wrong desires. That makes sense from a Stoic perspective. To have pride or shame about these things, he doesn't think makes much sense, because those are external. They're not really you. But he says the ordinary people expects benefit or hurt from external things, not from themselves. And so they're setting themselves up for being disappointed. He says, you may be unconquerable if you enter into no combat which is not in your control to conquer. So whenever you see somebody who's got these nice things, who he says is eminent in honor or power or high esteem, take heed not to be carried away by appearance and to pronounce that person happy. You don't know whether they're actually happy or not. Happiness for the Stoic depends on this stuff over here. And this makes perfect sense. I think a lot of you probably know some people who have a lot of nice things when it comes to these things. They have an attractive body that's in good shape. They have a lot of nice things. People look up to them. They get to mix in the right groups. And you've encountered them, and you find out that they're really not that happy. And why aren't they happy? Because they still desire more things. Or the things that they desire, they get disappointed with. They're not good enough for them. This is a big thing with bodies. I remember this when I used to actually, when I was into working out. You could go to the gym, and you'd see these guys who would work out constantly. And you'd say, wow, you're in really great shape. You got everything is totally cut, and you're not just doing it for looks. You actually can lift all this weight. And they'd be like, yeah, that doesn't, that's not enough. And you'd be like, wow, you're not happy, are you? You haven't made yourself happy. Because they have this part that's not really aligned properly. So what would that look like? He talks about this in the Discourses. He's got this chapter on improvement, and he says, what's the goal here? The goal is actually to attain what he calls tranquility, or peace, or satisfaction. So he says, what is progress? Well, you withdraw yourself, you withdraw your desires, you withdraw your opinions, and judgments away from external things. You let the external things be what they are. You let the world go on as it is. You don't necessarily try to make it into a better world or change it, except a little bit that belongs to you. You don't get in everybody else's business. You pay attention to your own business. You withdraw yourself from externals, and you turn to your own will. You turn to your own faculties. You turn to the part of you that's most you. You exercise it. You improve it by labor, so as to make it conformable to nature. That's the criterion for the Stoics, being in conformity to nature. Not nature in the sense of like, the nature channel or anything like that, but being in accordance with the way we ought to be. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And he says, if you do that, how are you going to be? You're going to be free. You're going to be unrestrained, unimpeded. You'll be faithful, modest. And he says, if you actually tie your desires in with things that you don't control, you're not going to be free. He says at another point, and this is where we'll sort of leave off with this, he says, if a person gave your body to any stranger he met on his way, you would be angry, wouldn't you? Imagine, that you're back in times when slavery existed and all that. So somebody, you're walking along with him, with your buddy, and your buddy says, hey, let's go in here. And you go in, and suddenly now, you belong to somebody else, and you got to do what they say. You'd be ticked off, wouldn't you? I hope so. Epictetus thinks that you're doing that with your mind all the time. If you're focusing on these things and placing your efforts and your care and your desire over here, then, he says, you don't feel any shame in handing over your own mind to be confused and mystified by anybody who happens to, in this case, verbally attack you or has something that you want. If you want these sort of things, or you want to avoid these sort of things, you have to do a lot of things that, place you in other people's power. If you want reputation, you have to do what? You got to kiss up to a lot of people, don't you? If you want to maintain your reputation, it's not something that you get once and for all. What do you have to do? Keep kissing up to people. If you want to become, a celebrity or something like that, you'll have to do even more of that. Is that really going to make you happy? Probably not if Epictetus is right, because what you're doing is you're placing yourself in other people's power. They have control over whether you're happy or not. What about your body? You have some control over it. You can work it out, right? You can diet, you can exercise, you can not do drugs, not drink too much, things like that. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to turn out the way you want. Like I could, with the body type that I have, I could never be like a big weightlifter. I'm what you call an endomorph. I actually have, believe it or not, underneath this should be like a thin frame, and not massive muscles. If I wanted to like lift a lot of weight, my bones aren't built for that sort of thing. My joints aren't built for that sort of thing. I'm built for like endurance things. Some of you are built for that. You have that. That is something that could be something that could happen for you if you chose to do it. But how does it work with exercise and dieting and all that? If you do it, are you finished once and for all? Once you've gotten yourself to that ideal weight and look and all that sort of stuff, how long does it take for you to lose that? Just not, nothing bad happening to you, just with inaction. A month? Yeah. If you're actually working out a lot and you go a week without working out, when you come back to that workout, it hurts, doesn't it? Because your body gets out of condition that quick. You don't have that much control over it. What about your mind? What about your soul? Do you have control over that? You can put patterns into your mind and your soul. That's what you're doing through education. That will last you your entire lifetime if you choose to keep them up.